Welcome to the next section. So we have covered the context around the course outline, and new ideas challenging the status quo. But next, we're going to look at what is the problem here. So to understand the problem that Bitcoin fixes, we need to go back to when Ray Tomlinson sent the first email. We saw 3 partial solar eclipses, 2 total lunar eclipses. Walt Disney opened their front doors in Florida. Rolls-Royce went bankrupt. Apollo 14 landed on the moon, and America ran out of money. The year was 1971, and President Nixon came on the TV and said this.
Accordingly, I have directed the Secretary of the Treasury to take the action necessary to defend the dollar against the speculators. I have directed Secretary Connally to suspend temporarily the convertibility of the dollar into gold or other reserve assets, except in amounts and conditions determined to be in the interest of monetary stability and in the best interest of the United States.
Let me explain what this means. So back then, gold was the money used in transactions between countries. Paper money, like the dollar, was like checks in a checkbook, if you remember what those things are. In that, it had no value other than it could be exchanged for gold, very much like checks in a checkbook. They don't have any value, but they can be exchanged for value. So gold was the real money back then. At the time, the United States was spending a lot more money than it was earning by distributing a lot more paper money than it had gold in the bank to exchange for it. As people turned this paper money into the bank for gold, the real money, the amount of gold in the US started to rapidly fall. It soon became obvious that the US couldn't keep its promise for all the existing paper money because it was running out of gold and there was still a lot of paper money out there. They had printed more than they had in gold for people to come into banks and redeem. So people holding dollars rushed to exchange them for gold before the gold ran out, as you would. Recognizing that the US was going to run out of real money, gold, on Sunday evening, August the 15th, in 1971, President Nixon went on television to tell the world that the US was breaking its promise to let people exchange their dollars, the paper money, for gold. As you saw, of course, he didn't say it like that. He said it far more diplomatically without making it clear that the United States was essentially defaulting. This broke the link between paper money to gold, which allowed the US to just continue spending more than it was earning. From this day, we started using a new monetary system called fiat money, which is a type of currency that is not backed by a commodity such as gold. Fiat currencies only have value because the government maintains that value. So since there was an increase in the number of dollars being printed with no limit on this now, they just printed more. They printed a lot more, which made its value fall and made the price of almost everything to rise. If this confuses you a little, I remember for me, it really did. When I was first learning about economics, it was very hard thing to grasp. So here is another way to look at it, and this might help it click for you. Okay, stick with me on this one. So imagine Nike, or Nike, I should probably say, is the central bank of America. The global currency is a limited edition Nike shoe. So people use shoes to pay for their shopping, whatever it is. The important part is that they are limited edition shoes. There is only a set amount of them, which makes them far more desirable. This was the gold standard, as there was a set limit. Well, until America done a naughty and started sneakily making more of them. This was the point that the limited edition shoe, in this case, became so popular that they decided to make it an unlimited edition. And you could get it in every shop, and they produced millions of them. This is just a super, super stripped back, simplified way of looking at what happened in 1971. We went from a limited edition Nike shoe to an unlimited edition Nike shoe. And Nike now have the authority to print or produce as many shoes as they possibly want and sell them to everyone. That is kind of what happened in 1971 with the dollar. I understand that that was a bit of a weird way of explaining it, but I hope that it can help some people and just for it to click a little bit more. So 1971, the dollar, and this was the birth of fiat money as we know it, because it's not now backed by gold, it's backed by government and the government trust, because they now control it. Have a look at the price of gold after America and the rest of the world actually came off of the gold standard. I'll tell you why that happened after this. The increase in printing of money now is one of the main causes of the inflation that we actually see today. Countries are now addicted to printing money. And I am focusing down on the dollar, as this is the superpower in the world of money and currencies. And by them coming off of the gold standard, subsequently, it took most other countries off as well, because other countries were tied to the dollar value, which the dollar was tied to gold. This printing of money saw an exponential rise in 2008 to relieve the mortgage-driven debt crisis, and 2020 to relieve the pandemic-driven economic crisis. And it almost certainly will happen again in the future if we carry on down this road. Here's what happened to the amount of dollars in circulation since 1971. All of this money printing, among other things, of course, which we won't dive into, has resulted in the purchasing power of your money decreasing by over 90% over the past 50 years. So let's break this down. Let's have a look at it. So here is the British pound with a 95% devaluation in purchasing power since 1971. And here is the US dollar with a 88% devaluation in purchasing power since 1971. Shocking, right? And maybe something that you didn't know. And I only use these two examples, but you can go and just Google this wherever you are, or whatever currency you are using. And of course, with all of this money printing and devaluation, it comes with a colossal amount of debt. The dollar is still the most dominant currency, so I'll focus down on this. But as I said in previous sections, it affects almost every other country. I mean, I'm Scottish, and I'll always use the dollar as a reference point when I'm talking about this sort of stuff. The rest of the currencies are kind of just like the younger brothers and sisters. It's the way I like to strip it back. So let's look at debt, a subject that everyone hates, but understanding it in this context is really important. And I've included plenty of videos in here just to make it a little bit less heavy for you. This is the US debt clock, and it shows how much debt America are in. You can also look at the world debt clock, and the numbers are staggering. I guarantee this number will be much higher if you just Google US debt clock right now. To comprehend the vast numbers that we're actually looking at here, here is a video that I made earlier. Putting $1 trillion into perspective is wild. But if you look at the national debt of America, it's 34 trillion. Now, to put this into perspective, if you stack them up, each dollar note one by one on top of each other, you could get to the moon and back nearly 5 times. There is no way out of this, as we're in something called a debt spiral. The interest rates of countries' debt is too high to even imagine repaying. The US is now paying over $1 trillion annually on its debts alone. Even the chair of the Federal Reserve, which is the US central bank, acknowledges this.
The U.S. is on an unsustainable fiscal path. The U.S. federal government's on an unsustainable fiscal path, and that just means that the debt is growing faster than the economy.
I have the sense this worries you very much.
Over the long run, of course it does. You know, we're borrowing from future generations. It's time for us to get back to putting a priority on fiscal sustainability, and sooner is better than later.
So it's likely we'll see another default on these debts in the near to coming future, but it'll be done in a sneaky roundabout way like President Nixon did. One thing to remember is that it's only been around 50 years we've been on the fiat monetary system, and it's not the way it's always been. Here is a video of Friedrich Hayek, who won the 1974 Nobel Memorial Prize in Economic Science. Wow, that was a mouthful. Highlighting his thoughts on government-run money.
Law, language, money, the 3 paradigms of spontaneously grown institutions. Now, fortunately, law and language have been allowed to develop. Money has originated in the original form, but as soon as it was there in its most primitive form, it was frozen. After 200 or 300 years of coins, all governments put their hands and stopped any further developments. Government said it must not develop any further. We were not allowed to experiment on it. Money hasn't been improved. Money has rather become worse in the course of time. And what we have had since in development are matters of government inventions, mostly our own, mostly abuses of money.
I have directed Secretary Connally to suspend temporarily the convertibility of the dollar into gold or other reserve assets.
And I have come to the position of asking, has monetary policy ever done any good? I don't think it has. I think it has done only harm, and that's why I am now pleading for what I've called denationalization of money.
How do you think that it would work? Would the major banks such as Chase Manhattan issue currencies or gold coins issued, or how would it?
Well, the governments can stop people from issuing money. They can hardly stop them from opening accounts in something. After all, in the modern world, hand-to-hand money, coins and paper is no longer the most important. Credits and credit cards are a substitute. So I think we can forget about existing money and existing banks, and will gradually open a system of accounts which will displace money.
That's a fascinating concept. Maybe the unit one day will be known as the Hayek. How in the world could you have a theory based on a tight definition of increasing the money supply at a particular rate, which varies from time to time, if you don't know what the fundamental money supply is?
I think the rule ought to be that whatever issues the money must adapt the quantity so that the price level will remain stable. But to believe that there's a measurable magnitude which you can keep constant with beneficial effects, I regard as completely wrong.
But
I don't believe that we shall ever have a good money again before we take the thing out of the hands of government. And then we can't take them violently out of the hands of government. All we can do is, by some sly roundabout way, introduce something they can't stop.
And there we have it. That's a run through of what the problem is. And it's vital to understand this, because if I'm about to show you a solution and a better way of doing something, then you need to understand what the problem is actually solving. Unless it just feels like Bitcoin is this random thing that's a bit of fun, whereas I'm about to show you it's completely opposite and a solution to a real problem, which I hope that you can now see and I've highlighted in good enough detail. If not, there is a lot of resources down below.